introduce yourself to someone whose name you don't recognize. Some of you may not even be from Trinity. Can I say again, Samuel, this isn't yours, right? There's somebody that scribbled notes from last night and your program is here. You lost yours and you want it back. It was on the table here this morning, so I don't know whose it is. Is it yours, Philip, at the back? Huh? Oh, it's yours, Joshua. Pastor Joshua. Okay. All is well. Yeah, you want it or not? Good morning. Okay, well, those of you who were here last night, welcome back. Good to see you again. Those of you who are not, this is an overview of how I'm dividing our time together. Last night we looked at chapters, does it show up there? Session 1, Genesis, and the book we call Genesis 12. Sorry, I focused on Genesis chapter 12 and the book we call Genesis. I'm sorry, for some reason we can't work out why the screen cuts off part of the image even for the song, but that's all up there in your booklet and notes as well, the outline of what we're doing. So we have 3 sessions today, 2 in the morning and then 1 immediately after lunch. So in this second session I want to draw out make some comments from Genesis chapter 12 to 26. Looking at Abraham, again, Ishmael, and then Isaac. In your booklet as well, I've given you, you could easily do this yourself if you go through the Bible, but I thought I'd just put it there for you as a summary of the various things that go on in these chapters from chapter 12 to 26. Chapter 12, God commissions Abraham with a blessing. And then we talked a lot about that last night. Abraham, even in chapter 12, you also have the story about Abraham lying about Sarah. When they're down in Egypt, they have to go to Egypt because of the famine. Chapter 13, you have the story of Abraham and his nephew, Lot, and how they in the end decide they have to separate. Chapter 14, you got this story where Abraham rescues Lot. They've separated, so Lot is living in another place. Abraham finds out that Lot has been captured. All in the city that Lot was living in has been captured by a group of 4 kings, a gang of 4. Abraham goes and rescues Lot from the gang of 4. And then there's this strange episode where Melchizedek, the king of Salem, comes and blesses Abraham. In Genesis 15, you've got, again, a little thing that seems odd to us, but a story which essentially is God renewing the covenant that he already made with Abraham. There's this image of animals being cut in pieces and fire and smoke. Genesis 16, you've got Sarah's servant, Hagar giving birth to Abraham's son Ishmael, and I will spend a bit of time on that this morning. I'm going through this because obviously, as I said last night, I have to be fairly selective in what I focus on, but just to remind you of all the content that is there in Genesis. Genesis 17, God renews his covenant again with Abraham and he commands this time circumcision as a sign. Genesis 18 is the introduction, if you like, to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where 3 men who turn out to be angels come and they receive hospitality from Abraham. Abraham intercedes for Sodom and Gomorrah because these 3 men or angels say that God intends to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham intercedes for Sodom and Gomorrah. Genesis 19 is the story of how God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah but rescues Lot and his daughters. Genesis 20, you've got another episode where Abraham again lies about Sarah, his wife, this time to the Philistine king, the king of Gerar, Abimelech. And then Genesis 21, Sarah gives birth to her own biological child, Isaac, and God saves Hagar, Abraham's concubine or second wife, and Ishmael. And then Abraham makes a treaty with the Philistines. Genesis 22, you got arguably the most famous story in Genesis 12 to 50, the binding of Isaac, where Abraham is commanded to bring Isaac up to sacrifice Isaac. Genesis chapter 23, Sarah dies, Abraham buys land to bury Sarah in. And this land is in what we would call Canaan. Genesis 24, Rebekah. This is now the story of Isaac, and he gets a wife, Rebekah. This is the longest chapter, I think, in the book of Genesis, and it's about how Rebekah is found to be a wife for Isaac. Genesis 25, Abraham and another wife, Keturah, and listed Abraham's sons through Keturah. Then Abraham dies. Then you've got the listing of the generations of Ishmael and Isaac. And I'm hoping to end today's session just making a short comment about that. We've got the birth of Esau and Jacob. Esau sells his birthright. Then Genesis 26, Isaac lies about Rebekah. So just like his father Abraham, Isaac lies about his wife Rebekah being a sister to again Abimelech of Gerar. So in a nutshell, this commentary, a summary of the content that is in these chapters. Hopefully that will remind you of some of the stories some of you may have read before, whether in your Sunday school days or in your adult life, you've heard some of these stories. Okay? I won't have time to go through every single chapter, obviously, so I'm just going to focus on some things and then hope to allow enough time and questions. I'll be happy to try and respond to anything I didn't cover, or you want to clarify something that I did comment on. Okay? So we are fasten your seat belts and let's go. You can, it might be easier if you follow along in your booklet. I'm going to focus on the sub-stories of Sarah, Hagar, Ishmael and Abraham. All right? So first, a story of Sarah. And Genesis chapter 16. Hers is a story from desperation, and we see this desperation right at the start there in the story, chapter 16, verses 1 and 2. Now, if you know the story, Sarah has come with Abraham. God has called Abraham to leave the New York of the ancient world, and it has come to this little, small area of town, and chapter 16, verse 3 tells us that it's been 10 years since they've left and have come to Canaan. So now they've been living 10 years. We don't know what happened in those 10 years. God obeyed, Abraham obeyed God, left his whatever cosmopolitan life and went to this land. And 10 years we don't really know what's happened. But we're just told here at chapter 16, after 10 years they've been in the land of promise. Sarah has still not given birth. Remember, God had promised Abraham in chapter 12 that he was going to make Abraham's name great, bless him with many descendants, and he would be a blessing to many nations. But now, after 10 years, Sarah has still not given birth, so there is no heir, there is no child, and so she's getting a bit desperate. As she herself is very clear, verses 2 and 3 of chapter 16, she initiates the plan to get a child. I guess it's the modern equivalent of our adoption. She decides that there's nothing, as it were. It wasn't looked upon negatively in the ancient world, just like adoption isn't looked upon negatively at all. It's something that one can do. So in the ancient world, she suggested maybe we can get a child through Hagar, who is my close servant and aide. So Sarah asked Abraham to take on Hagar as his second wife, if you like, or concubine, we sometimes use that phrase, and let the child, so legally in the ancient world, if they had a child through Hagar, that child would be the legal heir of Abraham and Sarah. Sarah would say, this is my child. So he would have the rights of the firstborn. So that was Sarah's plan. So verse 3, Sarah took Hagar, her servant, and gave Hagar to Abraham. So this was consensual. This was part of the way they were trying to carry on and build a family. So the plan works because Hagar becomes pregnant. But the sense of contentment and fulfillment that Sarah hoped, I think, to achieve by having an adopted child, if you like, didn't seem to work out. Sarah was, we're told in verse 4, was despised in her eyes. So just a quick comment about the way it's expressed there. Literally, the Hebrew simply reads, her mistress. Her refers to Hagar. Hagar's mistress, obviously Sarah, was despised in her eyes. So the question is, whose eyes, who was despised? Whose eyes? In Hagar's eyes or Sarah's own eyes? So the NIV makes it quite clear that they think it's she, Hagar, began to despise her mistress, began to despise Sarah. So in NIV's understanding of the verse, and they could be correct, Hagar becomes pregnant, and once she becomes pregnant, she despises Sarah. Oh, my mistress, 10 years, cannot get pregnant. Me, very fast, I get pregnant. So NIV understands it like that. Hagar began to despise Sarah. And that's possible because really in the next verse, that's what Sarah accuses Hagar of doing. Complains to Abraham, no, Hagar despises me, get rid of her. So it could be that that's what happened. But the Hebrew actually simply says, she was despised in her eyes. And the King James Version just translates it like that. Her mistress was despised in her eyes. Her mistress obviously refers to Sarah. So could it mean that Sarah felt despised in her own eyes? Despised in the sense of, is this great? How come I cannot have a child? Hagar so easily gets a child, and so Sarah begins to feel, so it wasn't Abraham's fault, I must be the one who is infertile, as it were. I mean, in those days they probably didn't know how to test whose fault it was whose fertility problem it was. So maybe it was that Sarah was beginning to feel, what kind of woman am I? I can't give birth. And you have sometimes those sort of feelings. Maybe Sarah was feeling despised in her own eyes. I suspect, we don't know whether Hagar was despising Sarah or Sarah was just feeling despised. But in any case, moving on, Sarah feels the reaction. She accuses Hagar of despising her. So Sarah feels, however she's feeling, the sight of Hagar around looking pregnant doesn't make Sarah feel horrible. And so she accuses Hagar of despising her, and she blames Abraham. Even though, of course, it was her idea in the first place to get Hagar pregnant, she blames Abraham. So this is a reaction, and although I presented it almost, cynically or in laughter, if we are honest and we look at our own lives, sometimes it is like that. We react in such a way, we start blaming others, and really we have a lot to blame for ourselves. Okay, so Sarah accuses Hagar, and we're told in verse 6, chapter 16, she starts treating once her very close friend, if you like. Sure, a servant, but obviously a very close servant that she was quite happy to offer her as a concubine to her husband, now starts to turns against Hagar and treats her harshly. Alright, so that's the way Sarah's story develops, from desperation. Then just cutting forward, because I'm going to speak about Hagar, and we'll come to Hagar and when she's out there in the wilderness. But I want to carry on with Sarah. 5 chapters later, in chapter 21, Sarah eventually bears her own son. She finally gives birth, and she names her son Isaac, which means he laughs. Okay, so Sarah does give birth to her own biological child, and she herself laughs with joy, chapter 21, verse 6. So it's a play on the name Isaac, which means he laughs. God has brought me laughter, a metaphor for joy. God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me or will rejoice with me. So laughter being used in a very positive sense there. Earlier, of course, in Genesis 18, when God had come in the form of these 3 strange visitors to Abraham and had Abraham had been told, don't worry, your wife Sarah, who was then about 90 years old, if you take the figure literally, assuming the numbers are literal, if you were with me in the first half, part 1, you know, we're not sure how literally we're supposed to take the numbers in Genesis. But if in this story, it's literal, 90 years old, she's told she will give birth to a child. She laughs at the idea that she could possibly, a woman who is so old, but even if it was half of 90, if literally she was 45 or 50, even today we would, you know, be quite thinking, I am not really likely, right? But anyhow, so Sarah thinks that promise seems a bit far-fetched. She had laughed at that promise and even Abraham had laughed at the idea, because he says, again, if the number is literal and meant to be understood literal, he was 99 years old at that time when he's told that he will bear a child through Sarah. So even if you half 99, then Abraham is, even if he was 50 years old, he would not likely be thinking that he's going to have another child. But anyhow, so there's a play on that. Eventually they do have a child, Isaac, and so they named him Laughter. And Sarah says, oh, the Lord has given me laughter. So that's the way, it's a delightful story, isn't it? The way it unpacks like that, using that kind of language. So from desperation and a desperate plan, as she asked her servant to be like a second wife to her husband and get a child, that desperate plan, which didn't turn out so well, now turns to, her life now has some delight because she has her own child, Isaac. But then there is this episode in verse 9 of chapter 21. She sees Ishmael, her first child, if you like, Abraham's first son, and she sees Ishmael laughing. So again, there's that play on that word. Now Ishmael is laughing. Isaac is named Laughter. Ishmael is happy, he's playing, he's laughing. And for some reason this makes Sarah angry, and she decides to chase Hagar and her son Ishmael out of the house. Chapter 21, verse 10. Let me make a comment, because this is usually missed in our English story, in English versions. There's ambiguity in the way verse 9, what verse 9 is saying. What was Ishmael laughing about? Was he just having fun, and then Sarah sees Ishmael having fun and she can't stand it for some reason and decides, now I've got my own child, I don't want this child who is the child of Hagar, I don't want him around, he's so happy and contented in my house, I want to get rid of him. Or was she angry because she saw Ishmael laughing at her son, Isaac? That's how my Sunday school teacher always taught it, right? It was Ishmael was mocking Isaac. Let me just explain to you that is possible, but it's not obvious from the way the story is told. But first, let me give out a gift. And those of you who were here last night and you laughed, you understand what this gift is. It's a beautiful bamboo cross. See whether a gift, and I know some of you are good with numbers. Who can tell me how old Ishmael was when Isaac was born? Genesis 21. Well, straight away. Great. How old do you think he was? 14. Very good. Good enough. Very likely 13, 14, or 15. Wow, fantastic. That's assuming, of course, again, that the numbers that are given to us in the book of Genesis are meant to be taken literally. Presumably, in this case, it was. And in case you're wondering how she found out, this is the way it works. We know in chapter 16, verse 16, we're told that Abraham is 86 years old when Ishmael is born. Okay, so the Bible tells us, again, assuming the number 86 is meant to be understood literally. Some scholars think it's symbolic, it should be roughly half of that, 43. But anyway, let's work with this. 86 years old. So now you can work it out, right? If he's 86 when Ishmael is born, when the three messengers, the three angels come and speak to Abraham in Genesis chapter 17, Abraham says, I'm already like 100 years old, and the text says 99 years old actually. Chapter 17, verse 1, Abraham is 99 years old when he's told now that Sarah will become pregnant. So you get it? 86, now he's 99, so already 13 years have passed. 9 months later, or maybe 10 months, depending on how quickly things work after the promise. So Ishmael is probably about 13 years, 9 months, or 14 years old, that sort of range when Isaac is born. So he's a young teen. Ishmael is a young teen. Okay, so that's the setting. And Genesis 21, Isaac is born. So Ishmael is at least 13, 14 years old, older than Isaac. Okay, so anyway, that was just an excuse to give out one more of the presents that cross. But it also helps you visualize what's going on here. When Sarah now sees this teenage boy, Ishmael, laughing, for some reason, she chases him and Hagar out. So where is the ambiguity? The ambiguity, let me show it to you from this translation. NIV removes the ambiguity and interprets it as Sarah saw that the son, Ishmael, whom Hagar the Egyptian had born to Abraham, was mocking. So it's a negative translation, mocking. As I said, the word really is laughing. He was laughing, or he was playing, right? So he was laughing. The English Standard Version interprets and translates it simply, so it doesn't make any value judgment on this laughter. Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had born to Abraham, laughing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with laughing. Laughing can be used in a very positive way. Sarah herself had used the word positively. God has given me laughter. But now Sarah sees Ishmael laughing. And that's all that the Hebrew story and Hebrew text says. Ishmael was laughing, and that makes Sarah angry. NIV has assumed that Ishmael must have been laughing at Isaac. The text doesn't say it, but I mean, perhaps you can read behind the lines, but we can't be certain about that. But that's how NIV gets the word mocking. Presumably mocking who? Mocking maybe this little boy, 13, 14 years old, younger. But it is a guess that NIV is making. You understand what I'm trying to say? The TNK is short form for another translation called the Tanakh, which is done by Jewish translators. They too just use the word playing for laughter. Ishmael was playing. So he was happy. He was obviously happy, playing. And somehow seeing Ishmael, the son of Hagar, the servant who we know already Sarah, her relationship with Hagar had soured, right? So some years already had started treating her very harshly. Now sees her son playing and so happy. Maybe Sarah starts thinking, I don't want to see them anymore. I've got my own child now. Let's see whether I can get rid of them. Why is Sarah unhappy? Is she trying to protect Isaac because she has seen Ishmael, this teenager now bullying her little baby? Possibly. So maybe protecting her own son from Ishmael. Maybe Ishmael is laughing or mocking. What a baby. But is that being unfair to Ishmael? We're not sure, like I said. Maybe, in fact, Ishmael was not mocking his little baby half-brother. She was just having fun playing out there, and somehow Sarah just said, I don't want this chap because I want now my son, my own son, Isaac. I want him to be the only child of Abraham. I want him to receive the full inheritance. I don't want him to have to share it now with Ishmael. Maybe Sarah starts thinking like that. She's trying to give Isaac the full inheritance by getting rid of Ishmael. Verse 10, in fact, seems to be the reason that she gives to Abraham concerning this. If you look at verse 10, where she then tells Abraham, let's get rid of Ishmael because I don't want him here. We want Isaac, okay, to receive everything. So, like I said, one of the ways the Bible speaks, and the Bible often uses stories to speak. Jesus himself did that very often in his teaching method. He would use parables. And as you know, with any stories and with any parables, there are certain details where the storyteller leaves silent. allowing the listener to try and think, oh, what's going on here? The various possibilities. And God wants us to reflect on these. Not so much to be able to answer definitively what is the story saying, but it's making us reflect. Would I ever react like that? Would I ever do something like that? Should I ever do something like that? And it's meant to make us think about our own life and what values we think are important. So this is part of Sarah's story, and the way her story is meant to speak to us, the way it's meant to bless us and guide us. Sarah, we know, was someone who felt very barren and unfulfilled in life. She had not had a child. For her, that was, for people, or ladies in the ancient world, to have a child was something so important for their own sense of status and fulfillment in life. When our success fails to bring us the desired fulfillment, I use the word success here because remember, it was Sarah's idea, plan, to have a child through Hagar, a good servant. And the plan worked. They got a child, but for some reason Sarah didn't feel happy or fulfilled when her own plan worked. When our concern for what people think about us causes us to act harshly towards others. This is where, if you think in the story, Hagar has started now to despise Sarah, then Sarah reacts. Hagar doesn't think very highly of me. And so we get angry. Why is it she doesn't think highly of me? Why does she despise me? And so it causes us now to act harshly against that person. We allow someone's feelings about us to start dictating how we feel about them. When our desire to protect and profit our own, was Sarah desiring to protect and profit her own son Isaac over against the half-brother Ishmael, makes us act harshly towards others. She acts very harshly towards Hagar. She sends her and Ishmael, a teenage son Ishmael, out into the wilderness, where effectively on their own they would probably die. And we'll see in the story of Hagar, the only reason she survived is God comes and sends an angel to save Hagar and Ishmael. And then I put there for us to think about, I wonder whether our desire sometimes to defend Christ makes us want to speak harshly or disrespectfully to others whom we think are attacking our Christ. And we've got to ask whether or not that is the way God wants us to respond and react. Because it is one thing surely to try to protect or defend our own, but it is another to justify treating other people harshly in order to do so. It's one thing to say, yes, I think I have a responsibility to protect my own, but we've got to think carefully, does that therefore justify my treating another person harshly, and his son and her family? And what are we allowed to do to protect our own? And the story of Sarah makes us try and think through, where are the lines? Where would crossing the line be? And I would think, surely Sarah crosses the line by driving Hagar and the son out. For whatever reason, she's got angry with them and wanted them out, to send them out into the wilderness where there was almost certain death, was surely a very cruel thing to do. So similarly, I think it is one thing to defend the Christian faith, quite another thing to speak very harshly of other religions. And we need to be careful about that. In Singapore, of course, where I come from, the government reminds us of this again and again. Right? We are allowed freedom of religion, but we are not allowed to speak disrespectfully of another religion. So even when we conduct seminars like comparing religions, comparing Christianity with other religions, we are only allowed to compare them in terms of what they teach. We're not allowed to say anything disrespectful about the other religion. And I think that's a reasonable request. I don't think that is an unreasonable request, because we're trying to get along with everyone. We can speak honestly and say, yes, so this religion teaches that. The religion I follow, Christianity, teaches this. There is no need to in defending your religion, to speak badly of another person's religion. Surely one can try and draw that line. It's only when you get into debates and personal attacks that sometimes we tend to think the way to strengthen your own position is to start speaking how horrible and the other side is. There really is no need to do that. And we should reflect on that in our own personal relationships as well. There may be reasons why you prefer one person over another candidate, but there's no need to run the other candidate down in order to defend the particular person that you choose. But anyhow, worth thinking about. But anyway, so this is the story of Sarah and her relationship with Hagar. Okay? Now, I'm sure some of you may have questions or thoughts, as I've spoken about it and presented the story in this way, which for some of you may be new. And if you do, and you are provoked, say, no, I think that's the way the stories are meant to work. It's meant to make you think, is that really what's going on? And if so, you reflect on it. But hold those back. Let me now share with it from Hagar's perspective as we go now into the story of Hagar, because obviously her story is closely related to Sarah's. So now I'm back to chapter 16, when Sarah had initially initiated the plan for Hagar to give Abraham a son, and she did so successfully. But then Sarah, remember once Hagar was pregnant with Ishmael, Sarah turned against her own servant Hagar and started to treat her very harshly. You know, her tone of voice must have changed. The way she started reacting to Hagar now was obviously very harsh. And so Hagar ran away. She's probably still pregnant at this time. Maybe Ishmael isn't even born in chapter 16. She said, I can't stand it. Sarah, my mistress, my one-time good mistress, look at her, we got along so well. Now she's treating me so badly. I can't stand it anymore. She runs away from Sarah. And then when she's out there, the angel of the Lord, we're told, and this is just scripture that I put up here, so maybe let's read together. Let's have the men, just to break the monotony of my voice, let's have the men read in white, and then the ladies read in yellow as we read these verses together. Men begin. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. Okay, thank you. So that's the story. Hagar runs away from Sarah because Sarah has been treating her very harshly. She's out there on her own, and the angel of the Lord comes to Hagar. Okay, so unpack the story a bit for you. Hagar is accused of not respecting Sarah. Right? Remember, Sarah complains to Abraham that Hagar is now despising me. Was Hagar falsely accused? I've already explained to you why that is a possibility. Because the text doesn't actually say who was despised in whose eyes. But anyway, maybe Hagar was starting to feel arrogant. Oh, I give birth, Sarah, whatever it is. But Sarah starts treating her harshly, verse 6. So Sarah's relationship with Hagar has soured quite considerably. Hagar has no voice. So in this story that we have about Hagar, she doesn't speak at all in verses 1 to 6. Right? So we don't have her version of the story until later when she speaks in chapter 21. Some other facts about Hagar, in case you've forgotten. She's an Egyptian. So the storyteller makes sure we understand that Hagar is an Egyptian. So interestingly, now we've got a story where we've got a Hebrew lady who is mistreating her servant who is an Egyptian. This is obviously the reverse of what's going to happen in Exodus, where you're going to have Egyptian masters or mistresses mistreating their Hebrew servants. And that's going to lead to the big story of the Exodus. But here earlier, it was first a Hebrew, well, I shouldn't say Hebrew, but from the line, Abraham's line, where an Egyptian servant or slave was being badly treated. It's the same word that is used in the Exodus story, where Sarah treated Hagar harshly or oppressed her. Then later the Egyptians were oppressing the Hebrews. It's the same phrase, the same word that is used there in the Exodus story. Hagar decides to run away from Sarah, who has now become an oppressor. This is the background of the story. So she's an Egyptian slave. And then in chapter 16, verse 7, the angel of the Lord comes and speaks to Hagar, and that's the passage we read together just a few seconds ago. And then at the end of that episode, that encounter with the angel of the Lord, in verse 13 of chapter 16, Hagar gives God a nickname. It calls God, you are the God who sees all things. Right? God, the one who sees. Because God, obviously, in sending the angel, means he has seen her misery, seen how harshly treated she had been by Sarah. And so Hagar responds by saying, God, you are the God who sees my misery. She's the first person in Scripture to give God a name. I mean, God has been giving people names, but here she's the first. She has the honor of being the first person who gives God a name that some of us, we sing songs about God, the one who sees all things. It's a positive name. So Hagar is an Egyptian, remember that. The Lord, sorry, I use the Hebrew letters YHWH. In English, we sometimes pronounce this Yahweh. The Lord recognizes her affliction. He does not blame her for disrespecting Sarah. He does not come to her and say, well, the reason, that Sarah is treating you so harshly is because, you despise her. You better go back and say sorry. We have none of that in the story, right? None of that is listed out there. The Lord just comes to Hagar and says, I see your misery. I see the affliction, the harsh treatment that you have been suffering. And in verse 9, the angel tells her to return to Sarah's harsh treatment. Think about that. Wow! So let me just bring the verses up to you. The angel of the Lord tell her, go back to Sarah, your mistress, and submit to her. Literally, it's humble yourself under her hand. So the Lord comes to Hagar and says, I see all the suffering and the affliction, the oppression, the harsh treatment that you are having, but go back and submit to it. I mean, essentially, that's what God says to Hagar. The Tanakh translation puts it quite starkly. Go back to your mistress and submit to her harsh treatment. Wow, that's a hard word. The CSB, that's the Holman Christian Study Bible. The Christian Study Bible translates it, you must go back to your mistress and submit to her harshness or her mistreatment. That's a hard word from the Lord. Right? A pretty hard word for Hagar. But what were her alternatives? So, in fact, this is the way I think the angel is trying to help Hagar consider her alternatives. But first, before I forget, God's tough word actually comes with a very encouraging promise, verses 10 to 12. Go back and submit to Sarah, but the angel promises Sarah, I will increase your descendants so much, this is verses 10 to 12, that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant, you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael. For the name Ishmael means God has heard. Right? For the Lord has heard of your misery. Well, it's a great promise, isn't it? It's almost as wonderful as the promise that God gave to Abraham directly. I will increase your descendants, they will become too numerous to count. It's a great promise that God gives to Hagar. Hagar obeys God's tough advice and returns to Sarah and gives birth to Sarah, Abraham's first son, Ishmael. Okay, so in the story we have for Hagar, Hagar clearly feels mistreated by her boss, Sarah. She has had to live with this unfair treatment. She decides to run away, but in the end God sends her back to continue living with the possibility that Sarah will continue to treat her badly. And that's likely what happened, because if you know, a few years later, well, whether it's 13 years later or however, Sarah decides I've had enough and kicks Hagar out permanently for good. Remember in chapter 21 when we reach that stage after Isaac is born. But Hagar must have found strength from God's promise to be able to cope with that. What happened? I thought I had something about considering your slide. Oh yeah, that's when I talk about God. Okay, I'll come back to that. Okay, so this is part of the, I think, for our reflection, or at least what I've thought about as I think about the story of Hagar. God basically encourages her with a promise, but says, you may have to continue living under Sarah, as difficult as that might be. And in this next section, when I talk about God, I'm going to talk about, I think the alternatives for Hagar were probably worse. Living out there in the wilderness, she would probably die on her own, go back to Egypt. Would also have been, I think, pretty tough. But anyhow, before I move forward, let me just comment on this thing which I wrote, that living with unfair treatment. Because the relationship had reached such a stage that it looks as if Hagar was being treated quite unfairly. There are many people, and maybe some of you may know people yourselves for whom you would describe seem to have been given a really unfair deal here on earth. Life has been very unfair to them. They seem to have much more suffering than other people. And yet they somehow manage to cope by God's grace. Some of you may know the story of Annie Johnson Flint. She lived for 66 years on earth. But most of her 66 years were lived in suffering and pain. Both her parents died when she was only 7 years old, so she was already an orphan at 7. In fact, her mother had died earlier. Her dad died when she was 7. Her mother died when she was only 3 years old. I mean, if we just pause a while to just think how emotionally difficult that must have been for Annie growing up. Without a mother from such a young age, without a dad from 7 years old, so without any parents at all. And yet, in her own life, when she was only a teenager, 16 years old, sweet 16, we sometimes say, but at 16 it wasn't very sweet for her, because she began to break down, her body began to break down with what we would call some kind of severe arthritis. So at such a young age, began to contract arthritis. And so by 20 years old, she could no longer walk without help. Right? So at 20, she couldn't even walk. She would suffer frequent embarrassment later in life because she couldn't control her bowels. She had incontinence. Her body became gradually twisted and deformed by rheumatoid arthritis. And then, to make it worse, cancer struck and weakened her body even further. And so she was confined to bed for so long. She would have body sores, bed sores, for being in bed so long. So as we look at her life, so much of it full of suffering, right from a young age. And yet, she has blessed us with beautiful poems and songs. Some of us may know her poems. The biography written about her was titled The Making of the Beautiful. What an inspiring story. Here's one of the poems that she wrote. Some of you may know this one. God gives more grace when the burdens grow greater. And Annie is someone who knew a life of many burdens. So try and imagine Annie trying to get through a day with severe pain, and yet speaking how God sends more strength when the labors increase. To added affliction, He added His mercy. to multiply trials, His multiplied peace. God's love has no limit, His grace has no measure, His power no boundary known unto men. For out of His infinite riches in Jesus, He giveth and giveth and giveth again. How someone who suffered so much in her life could produce such beautiful words. I mean, it's a miracle. She blesses us, even though we might think her life was so not blessed. Yet she has been such a blessing to so many people who have been encouraged by her songs and her poems. Try to imagine for her a day when her body is hurting so much, and maybe she feels like giving up. She writes something like, when we have exhausted our store of endurance, when our strength has failed before the day is half done, when we reach the end of our hoarded resources, our Father's full glory, full giving is only begun. His love has no limit, His grace has no measure, His power no boundary known unto men. For out of God's infinite riches in Jesus, He giveth and giveth and giveth again. How did Annie manage to manage? How did she manage to cope? I guess it must be somehow she found strength and encouragement from God, God's promise. That even though her life was so full of suffering and pain, God was her God. God loved her, and God promised one day she would have no more pain. She would be free from such pain. And that hope, that promise of an eternal future, of no more pain, but of blessing and glory, must have given her some kind of strength to endure. And not just endure, but in her pain produce such beautiful words and poems. Another one you might know, God hath not promised skies always blue, things like that. All from Annie Johnson. Praise God for her encouragement and her blessing to us. But let's include Abraham because he's part of this story of Sarah and Hagar. Remember, he's the guy caught in the middle. So we must not leave him out, although I won't say too much about him. Chapter 16, verse 16. His wife Sarah comes to him and says, "Your slave." Talking about Hagar. Remember, Hagar earlier is clearly described as Sarah's servant. But it's often like that when you're complaining about something. Your slave, Hagar, is in your... this is what Abraham says. This is Abraham saying to Sarah, "Your slave is in your hand. You do what you want." Remember, Sarah has come to Hagar and says, come to Abraham and said, "Hagar has been despising me." And so Abraham just says, "Okay, you decide what you want to do with her. She's your slave, she's your servant. Do with her whatever you think is best." Sarah mistreated Hagar. That's what she decided was best. And so she fled from her. One commentator looks at this and says, this Abraham is a bit of a... surely he should have realized it's not fair. Okay, husbands, I know it's difficult, right? If your wife complains about someone or something, it's hard for you not to side with her. Because if you side with the other person, there's a lot of problem as well. So I also know that the real difficulty in these tensions and this dynamic, so you sort of... But remember, Hagar is in a sense his second wife. To some extent, his second wife. Sarah herself had blessed that marital relationship where they had born a child, Ishmael. But anyhow, one commentator puts it this way: you can decide whether you think he's a bit unkind to Abraham. He knows that Abraham is a great character. Chapter 12 expresses faith in God. Okay? So the commentator puts it like this: Abraham is a hero on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. But on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays, he's a wimp. And he says, "Today, it's Tuesday." Right here in chapter 6, Abraham is a bit of a wimp, and he does let Sarah treat Hagar unfairly and harshly. And it leads Hagar to run away from the home, the household. She wants to get away, but the angel comes to her and says, go back, go back. Okay? Say a bit more about that. Things go from bad to worse for Hagar, you remember, and eventually she's driven out of the house by Sarah. In chapter 21, when Sarah now decides once and for all permanently, Hagar, get out of the house and never come back, it distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. Abraham knew that Ishmael was his son, and presumably loved his son Ishmael. And now his wife Sarah was saying, get rid of this son, Ishmael. He's not my son. Get rid of him and Hagar. It distressed Abraham, but that's what happened. Hagar and Ishmael were driven out of the house, never to come back. So for Abraham, we struggle. The struggle we face when we're caught between two people whom we love. Caught between Sarah, his wife, and Hagar, his second wife, if you like, secondary wife. Caught between his love for Ishmael, as well as his love for Sarah and Isaac, and tension, and the difficulty we have when we're caught like that. So plenty in these stories for us to reflect upon, because they become our stories. They are our stories as well, and our struggles. And it's meant to make us think, Lord, how should I react? How would you want me to react? Let's say something about God in the story. We read these verses already. We won't read them again. As I said to you, God tells through the angel, God tells Hagar to go back and submit to the harsh treatment or the oppression that Sarah had been giving out to her. Chapter 16, verse 7, you've got this wonderful phrase, God or the angel of the Lord comes to Hagar in her wilderness. So Hagar is out there, she's run away, she's in the desert where it's hot and dry and she's almost dying. God comes to her. And God asks two questions to help her consider her alternatives. Where are you coming from, Hagar? I mean, obviously God knows, right? God knows all things. He's not asking this because God somehow is ignorant and wants to find out where are you coming from. No, God knows. God is asking Hagar to try and answer, where are you coming from? Where do you think you are going? Where are you headed? So I think God is asking Hagar to think carefully. You've come from a household where there's food, there's water, you've got a shelter for yourself. You're coming out of that. Where are you headed to here in this wilderness? Where do you think you're going to go? How are you going to survive? And you're carrying a child. God tells her to return to her life of affliction. Go back to the house. It's better for you there than out here on your own. But God doesn't just say that. God encourages her with a promise of a good future, tremendous future. You will be mightily blessed with many descendants. And although we, with hindsight, can look back and realize that indeed that promise was fulfilled, because from Ishmael, and I said a lot more about this in the first session, you've got, in fact, all the Arab world today, virtually 95%, I think, of the Arab world trace their roots back to Ishmael, okay? Hagar's son. So that all those great Arabic nations all descend from Ishmael. So she indeed had many descendants. All right? Think of all the riches of Saudi Arabia and etc. But Hagar would never have seen any of that fulfilled in her whole life. Hagar, as far as we know, would not have seen how great descendants would become. For her, much of her life was lived, I guess, a life of suffering as a servant, a slave, harshly treated, having to run away, cast out. But God encouraged her with a promise. God saw her affliction on earth, and this is the part that we don't like. God sees the affliction, and Hagar says, Lord, you are the one who sees all things. You've seen my misery. But we wonder, Lord, if you see it, why don't you remove it? And I've got no answer to you for that, except to tell you what you already know. God's the same today. There's so much affliction in our lives. He obviously sees it, but for some reason doesn't always remove it. Thanks for the song, Samuel, that you led us in. I think you chose it because you know that song is used in a musical about Joseph, and we're going to be looking at Joseph this afternoon. You know, there is no mountain too tall. What is it? God cannot. But anyhow, the song basically says God can remove the mountains that are obstacles, and certainly He can. But our struggle is, why doesn't God do it all the time? Sometimes those mountains get left there for a pretty long time. We have to cope with them. Annie Johnson Flynn, why didn't God remove her arthritis? I don't have the answer. All I know is that this is reality. This is life on earth. This is our experience on earth. Much of our suffering and our oppression, the unfairness of life doesn't get removed, no matter how hard we pray. Sometimes it does. Praise God. Sometimes it does. But my experience, and as a pastor, I speak with so many people who suffer. My experience is most of the time it doesn't get removed. Right? Those miraculous healings, those miraculous paychecks that come from anonymous donors, they do happen. But the reason we rejoice is because they're so exceptional. It's wow! Most of the time, those mountains hang around for pretty long. And we have to endure. We have to cope. And those who manage to cope, a lot of the time it's because they've kept their eyes on God's promise and assurance and love. What kind of love is it? It's a kind of love that says, I suffer with you, I'm with you in your pain, even though I'm not removing it. It's a tough love. But anyway, so like I said, I don't have the answers to God's, why God leaves it for so long. Why He says one day it will be removed, and that one day sometimes is in another life. But anyhow, coming back to the story, we've got a God who asked Hagar and asked us to consider our alternatives. The alternative of just giving up. He invites us to keep on carrying our cross of suffering, and He asks us to take courage from His promise. That is the message of Genesis and the Bible. We continue to have to carry so many crosses on earth. But we have the encouragement. We're not carrying them alone. God is with us. He sees our pain, and He will be with us in our sorrow. Of course, as Christians, that gets painted so powerfully. God not only sees our suffering, He suffers with us. He Himself carries the cross. He Himself suffers on the cross. He knows what it feels like to suffer. And so we do not suffer alone. We remember we have a God who suffers with us, who understands what suffering feels like. He's not a kind of God that lives way up there and doesn't know how bad suffering is. He does know how bad suffering is. But He tells us, keep on carrying that cross. But one day, beyond the cross is resurrection. Don't give up. Take courage from that. Again, the words of someone else that you may be familiar with, Helen Keller, who was blind and deaf and almost dumb for most of her whole life, I think from the age of 6. Her fever was, from 19 months, so she was still a baby when she contracted a fever that left her blind and deaf. Listen to these words of her. For 3 things I thank God every day of my life. Here's someone who as a baby was rendered blind and deaf. For three things I thank God every day of my life. Thanks that God has promised me knowledge of His works, or given me and trusted me knowledge of His works. Deep thanks to God that He has set in my darkness, because her life, we would describe metaphorically, was a life of darkness. She was blind, she was deaf. Deep thanks that He has set in my darkness the light of faith, the lamp of faith. And deepest thanks that I have another life to look forward to. A life with joyous with light and flowers, with heavenly song. What kept Helen going, despite I think many times when she must have really been in a bad mood and angry? Who wouldn't be? I mean, thinking, oh, life is such a horror. In the end, be able to say things like that. I give thanks that God has promised me one day a life where there will be light, there will be flowers and heavenly song. So here's another person who's managed to carry her cross throughout her life on earth, looking forward to the promise of God being fulfilled one day. Let me just pause a little while, even though time is, I think the break is 10:30, right? Is there any questions? Questions are guaranteed in life. Answers aren't. Yes? He wants you to speak through the mic.
Hello. Reverend God.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier that you must not speak harshly of other religions. Then you mentioned something about, later on in Genesis, God promised Ishmael, I'll make you a great nation. And then just now you just mentioned the great nations of the Arabs. Coming back to verse 12, you somehow missed out.
Chapter 12 of, verse 12 of which chapter are you at? 16. Chapter 16, verse 12.
You are now with child and you will have a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. The rest of the passage reads, he will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility towards all his brothers.
Yes, thank you. Very good, very good. Let me see whether I've got it here. This is the question of chapter 16, verse 12, the translation of chapter 16, verse 12, particularly the second half of the verse. So as our brother, sorry, what's your name, brother? Ronald, thank you, Ronald. Ronald has asked, can I comment on the last part of that verse? He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. So that is part of God's promise to Hagar about her son Ishmael. The Lord. This sounds like fairly negative. A wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone. What it does certainly picture is that of someone who is often fighting against people. So he's very independent. He doesn't get along well, maybe, but he's obviously a strong character. Maybe born out of a life of suffering. Imagine as a teenager being driven out into the wilderness to die. Maybe that's developed into his character and he's become a bit like that. So but despite that, he goes on to father so many people and so many great nations. But let me just make a comment about the translation, because there are, again, there is another possible way to translate this verse. We've read the NIV, which uses the preposition against. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He will live in hostility toward all his brothers. But it need not be translated against. The preposition need not be translated against. So for instance, you'll see on the right-hand side, this is another translation. He will be a wild donkey of a man. So whatever that connotes, we can't be sure, but it does, maybe stubborn. And stubbornness can be bad, but stubborn can also be a solid thing that you refuse to give up. His hand will be upon all rather than against all. The preposition, the Hebrew preposition is open to this translation. His hand will be upon everybody, and everyone's hand will be upon him, and it need not necessarily be against him. Upon in the sense of against. And before all his brothers he will dwell. In other words, he will dwell in the presence of all his brothers. So this kind of translation is a bit less negative sounding. It need not be one where he's always fighting against his brothers. Right? He's living with his brothers, maybe blessing his brothers and the brothers blessing him. So quite a different connotation on this. Okay? So like I said, whichever way you go, I mean obviously the negative one, then it's not so good. When we look in reality, maybe sometimes it's like that, and they're all hostile. But as we've always said, when there's a hostile relationship with someone, it usually takes two to quarrel. It's not as if it's only one side's fault. In any quarrel, in any hostile relationship, both sides are involved. Yes, of course, we say one side may be more to blame than the other. It's always the other side that's more to blame than our side, right? it's always like that. So it could be that, but on the other hand, commenting on this, really that translation on the right is the one I think is the correct one. It's hard to be certain because just in most languages, prepositions can have a variety of meaning. Even in English, I walk with you. The preposition with. I walk with you can be a positive. I'm walking with you, we're friends, we exercise together. I fight with you. See, with, the same preposition, with now is, with there is effectively I fight against you. Right? I fight with you, I fight against you. So what I'm saying, prepositions often have this flexibility of use. So that's the reason why here in Hebrew as well, there is debate as to whether it should be, his hand will be against him or will be upon him, etc. So that's a variation. Yes? Would I like to comment on what's happening in the Middle East today? No, I wouldn't. Thank you. I wouldn't, because I think in any conflict, both personal and certainly in the complex world of international politics, it's complex. There are a lot of sides to the story, and if you're not right in it, and you aren't personally talking with both sides and trying to listen to both sides, it's very easy to give an opinion that is off base. And Middle East politics is extremely complicated. Extremely complicated. Right? So I know enough of it to know that it's all politics is complicated, but the Middle East politics is complicated to the nth degree. Okay? And so there's little point in my making a comment in a short while because it's going to be, it's not, I think, ultimately not going to be helpful. It's going to, so thank you, but I won't. Right? And I suppose my only comment would be to you as well. You sometimes read popular books about Israel, the Palestinians. It's very hard to find, it's very easy to find popular books that just side one side or the other. If the answer seems so straightforward, chances are they really haven't given proper attention to the complexity of the situation and the history of what's going on in that Middle East conflict. So be careful about that. Sorry, yes, that was question time, so that's why I jumped forward. I haven't actually finished what I did. So let me just move on a bit with Isaac, and then we have another session I could pick up from there if I don't finish here at 10:30. Am I at F now? Is that correct? Did I miss E? Okay, so I have to go back. No, I mean we just finished E there, right? Oh, wrong, is it? Okay, but I mean we got to this point already. Okay, good, so I can move on. Apologies for that, if the alphabet is wrong. Just to say something about Isaac, because I'm supposed to comment a bit about Isaac. You know, I told you I'm breaking my 4 sessions into Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, because they're the 3 patriarchs and Joseph. So 4 sessions, that was the easiest way to think about it. But for Isaac, there's very little to say, because really in Genesis, he's quite a quiet character. Jacob, there's a lot to say. Abraham, there's quite a lot to say. Joseph, there's quite a lot to say. But Isaac, you know, it's much more about, the longest chapter is about Rebekah, how Rebekah is found. In Isaac, very little is said, but let me just say a quick few things. If anything, what we see in Isaac is he experiences the same sort of things that his father Abraham experienced. Okay? So that's why on his own he's sometimes not given as much attention, because so much of his life seems to be a mirror of his father's life. And so I put there the heading, like father, like son. Abraham, his father, in his lifetime, there was a famine, and that's why Abraham in chapter 12 had to go down to Egypt. Okay, and again in chapter 20. Isaac, chapter 26, verse 1. In his lifetime, there was a famine, and so Isaac also suffered a famine. And interestingly, Jacob, Isaac's son, also experienced famine and had to go down to Egypt. So it's not just like father, like son, like grandfather, like grandchild. But coming back to Isaac, just like Isaac had a wife, Rebekah, just like his father had a wife, Sarah, who felt barren, could not bear a child for many, many years. Sarah was barren for at least 25 years. I remember she was 10 years already in Canaan, no child. So then she came up with a plan. Abraham, why don't you sleep with Hagar, my good servant? And then 13, 14 years later, when Ishmael is already 13, 14 years, then finally Isaac is born. So you've got 10 years in Canaan before she comes up with a plan and Ishmael is born, plus Ishmael's 13, 14 years. So we're looking at 24, 25 years before Sarah finally gets a child. That's a long time, 25 years. Married for 25 years plus without a child, you would have given up by then. So Sarah had that experience, but so did Isaac's wife. Isaac's wife, Rebekah, was barren for 20 years. Okay, so Rebekah also did not have a child for some 20 years. And I think when I talk about the blaming, never mind. I'll just here I'm talking about Isaac. And so the reason I say Isaac, because if you have a wife who's unhappy, it makes your life pretty miserable as well. Then Rachel is going down another generation, but I'm tracing this because interestingly in Genesis, I think that's one of the things it's trying to say, how quite often in our family, the generations, they experience a lot of the same things that their fathers and grandfathers experienced. Rachel, Jacob's wife, also didn't have a child for many years, although in the end, finally she bore Joseph, and then when she died giving childbirth to a second child. Isaac, just like Abraham, lies about his wife being his sister. So that's a negative similarity now. A very negative thing. He, just like his dad, was too afraid for his own life, and so lied about Sarah. We said a bit about this last night. Isaac does the same thing in chapter 26 with his beautiful wife, Rebekah. And interestingly, in the story, it's the same name, Abimelech, in the Philistine area for both Abraham and Isaac. So they both have the same insecurity about their wife being beautiful and how that might endanger their own life. Okay. A positive similarity. I didn't mention this about Abraham last night, but Abraham in chapter 12, and I've given you the verses I think in the notes, Chapter 12, verse 7, verse 8, chapter 13, verse 18, chapter 22, verse 9. Abraham often, when he went to a place and sensed God's presence there, would build an altar to worship God. So he built altars quite often. Wherever he went, he would build an altar. I suppose his way of expressing worship to God. And Isaac did the same thing. I mean, he would build an altar. We're told that he built a couple of altars too. This is not at all unusual in Roman Catholic and Orthodox Christian spirituality. You worship the Lord by building some physical thing as a way of marking your respect and worship of God. For Protestants, we are not so used to that kind of spirituality. We worship God in our heart. Wherever we're frightened of all these concrete physical symbols because we think they become too superstitious and it becomes sacred, right? We prefer to worship the Lord in the heart. They're really just different styles of spirituality. Some of you who have been to, for instance, Israel, you'll notice that a lot of our Roman Catholic and Orthodox brothers and sisters, they have built sanctuaries, altars if you like, church buildings, over places that they believe are very sacred, where Jesus was raised, the resurrection tomb, or the point of the crucifixion. And so they build an altar. And so for us, I wish it was just, plain like it was. But for them, that's the way you revere and respect the Lord. Anyway, I'm digressing. Because I know some of you went to Israel recently, but, just so you would understand the different sort of spirituality that goes behind it. Abraham would be more like okay, this is special, I want to build an altar. And he builds an altar there to worship the Lord. And Jacob did the same thing, built some altars. So I think that's a positive similarity. It's saying at certain significant points in your life, you pause and you make a mark. Yes, I want to remember, and I worship the Lord here. Isaac received the same assurance from God and commission from God. I used the word assurance, I explained that last night. Because in part, I think God's promise to Abraham was an assurance that his life would matter. His life would be significant. His life would bring value to others. Okay? It's an assurance that your life will count. Isaac receives the same assurance to be a model or a means of blessing to all nations. There is a phrase that wasn't used in the Abrahamic blessing. It's the first time it's used in Genesis for Isaac, where God says, I will be with you. That's a great promise. Later, God will use that same phrase for Jacob, I will be with you. But it's part of this assurance that God gives to Isaac, as he had done earlier to Abraham and later to Jacob as well. A sad similarity now. Like father, like son, Isaac suffered family divisions. We already know about Abraham's two wives, Sarah and Hagar. Later, Abraham would have another wife, Keturah. But the problem here, Ishmael and Isaac, the two brothers, whether or not they fought or didn't get along, we don't know. The story doesn't tell us. But there was a lot of division in Abraham's family. In the end, one half of the family had to leave. Right? We talked about that just earlier. Isaac too suffered the same kind of family dysfunction. This story of two sons, Esau and Jacob, and how those two brothers, didn't get along. Okay? So much so that Esau threatened, I'm going to kill my brother. And so Jacob runs away from home. So that's a sad similarity. Isaac, just like his father Abraham, had problems with the family. Part 1 in Genesis, we had the story of Cain and Abel. So even there, right at the start, you had two brothers, or one brother really being a horrible fella. Family problems are described quite honestly in the Bible. Once again, the Bible is true to human experience. I suspect most of us, either in our own families or in some of our extended families, we know of family problems and troubles. Seems to be I'm not saying that to excuse us, but I'm saying this is the reality of our human failures and sins, that we can't seem to get along even as family. Sometimes it's family that makes it, it's even harder in family. So family matters in Genesis. Family matters in Genesis. It's a play on that word matters. Foolish parents. We've seen Sarah's insecurity, her selfish love for Isaac over Ishmael. I don't know whether, I hope you know the story of Isaac and Rebekah and their foolish favoritism. Isaac favored Esau, Rebekah favored Jacob. Right? So you have one parent favoring one child, and then it leads to all kinds of problems for them. Jacob too had that same problem. He had so many sons, he favored Joseph. The other brothers got angry, jealous against Joseph, maybe in part, probably in part because their father favored Joseph so much, so they started not liking Joseph. They sold him off. So parents, we sometimes make really foolish mistakes. We got all kinds of silly things. Maybe our mistake isn't favoritism. Maybe we've learned from that now, but maybe there are other foolish things we do. Maybe our problem is we spend so much time at work that we have no time for our kids. And then they end up. Okay, I can tell you, I just found out Sam is a PK. Right? Pastor Joshua told me that, Samuel, you're a PK. You know what's a PK, that phrase? Oh, you do. Okay. I hope that's not too negative for you. Do the rest of you know what the term PK is? Yeah, pastor's kids. I don't know if I told you all this silly joke, but it's only half a joke. There are only three kinds of kids in the world. Right? There are those that are PK, pastor's kids, MK, missionaries' kids. And the rest are okay. Like I said, it's a joke, but it's only half a joke. Because the phrase PK and MK developed because they found that a lot of pastors' kids and a lot of missionary kids sometimes grow up not being part of the church. Even though their parents are so committed to church. But strangely enough, a large percentage of PKs and MKs in their teenage and young adult years wander away. Even Billy Graham's son, Franklin Graham, at one stage was away from church for so long. Only later in life came back. And presumably it's part of this where preachers and missionaries are so busy with work. And if it's God's work, how can you say, don't do so much work now? Because pastors, missionaries, always at church, always doing Christian work. And maybe some of the kids develop God and God's people take my dad away from me. And so church becomes that which takes my dad away from me. Dad loves the church more than he loves us. Dad cares for church members more than he cares for us. And so they develop a kind of reaction against it. Maybe that's, anyway, I don't know what our own foolishness is, but now, not so that I don't just focus on us, can I tell you a story of Charles Francis Adams, who was the U.S. ambassador to Britain. I forget the years now, but he had a son called Brooke. And Charles Francis Adams was a very disciplined fellow, and he would always journal, journal like a diary, write your comments, reflections on the day. And he taught his sons to write a journal, write their comments in a diary, right from young. And so there is a journal entry that Charles Francis Adams, the ambassador to the UK, to Britain, writes on this particular day, where he said, I spent the whole day fishing with Brooke, caught nothing, wasted day. But his 8-year-old son, Brooke, also journaled that day. Spent the whole day with Dad fishing. Best day of my life. So parents, let's not make the mistake of thinking purely in terms always of work productivity. Sometimes being with your kid, playing with him, even if nothing, in our terminology, nothing constructive gets done, It could be very important. Anyway, we have our own foolishness. And part of the way God's word speaks to us, we're meant to reflect on it. We may think, I would never make the mistake of those parents like Jacob or whatever. Maybe you wouldn't, but do we make other mistakes? May God give us wisdom and guidance. We've got foolish relatives, and there's so many there, but I won't work through all of that. We're going to stop for a break. Okay? You've got Abraham, but just to see how, in fact, these family wars or division in Genesis have played out in the rest of world history. Abraham's sons, Ishmael and Isaac, and the division that took place there, you've got that division taking place on the world stage today, Arabs and Jews. Because Jews trace their line through Isaac, Arabs trace their line through Ishmael. Remember, they were brothers. They were half brothers. So sad that you've got this deep division that's present today, up to today. Isaac's sons, Esau and Jacob, the fight. It's the same. Arabs traced their line also through Esau and Edom, because Esau became Edom, and Jews through Jacob. Okay, but I think there's coffee, is that right? Is that why we take a break? So, okay, great. So I guess we should have a break. Then I'm sorry,